Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending where you are. Happy weekend. I am here today to talk about Spanish food and recipes, and joining me is Jane Connelly, and she is based in Barcelona, and no better than her to talk about Spanish food and recipes with us. So in just a moment, I'll invite her on the stage here, and she will be joining us to talk about Spanish food and recipes. She's based in Barcelona, and so she knows a lot about Spanish food, recipes, the culture, and here she is. Jane, how are you
Hello.
today?
Hi, good afternoon or good morning to you.
Thank you. So nice to have you. And I was just telling everyone you're based in Barcelona. So let's go
Mhm.
ahead and dive right in again. If you have any questions or comments throughout, feel free to add them, and Jane and I would be happy to answer them. Jane's Instagram handle is at Jane Food Travel. And so, Jane, tell us, how did you end up in Spain and specifically in Barcelona?
Well, it's a long story. Maybe it's a little bit cliche. As you can imagine, what takes you across the world is often love. So that was my story. I studied abroad when I was in university in southern Spain in Sevilla, and there I instantly fell in love with Spain, its culture, its gastronomy, and as well with a cute local boy. So
Ah,
I went home and I finished my degree, and then I moved straight to Spain when I finished school, where I lived in Madrid. So
okay.
I lived in Madrid for 6 years, and then about 4 years ago moved to Barcelona to study a master's, and I've been here ever since.
Wow. Very nice. And an awesome story as well. I know that you have a daughter, correct?
I do. I do. I'm a new mom. I'm a
Awesome.
brand new mom. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Jane, so what is it that you do from your Instagram, this combination of food and tourism? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, like a lot of us, I mean, I won't say that it's unique in any way to love traveling and to love food. I think that especially nowadays, as people have more exposure to the different types of cuisine and accessibility to travel, more and more people are choosing to prioritize seeing new places and getting to know new cuisines as more important maybe than other materialistic items. So the idea is food tourism. So you combine the two, right? So you combine a passion for food, gastronomy, wine, local culinary culture, and then doing that through travel and tourism. So this was something that was sort of innate. It was something that I absolutely loved. It took me around the world. I lived in Mexico for a little while, and then I moved to Europe, and I traveled around Europe. And actually, when I was doing the Camino de Santiago, do you know it's the St. James pilgrimage across northern Spain?
Yeah, how many miles?
I was Yeah, so I was in a bit of a crossroads in my life, and so I decided to do the Camino. It's also a little bit cliche when you're lost, you go to that for some direction. And on my first day walking the Camino, I met another pilgrim, and he worked in food tourism.
Okay.
And so it was kind of this aha moment that it was actually possible to combine, these two great passions that I have, which are food and tourism, into a career. That there's actually a big space, room to learn. There are masters on it, and then there's also different types of work and different types of avenues you can use these two passions to work in. So from them, I decided to do the masters, where I really got my hands dirty in food tourism. And
Mm.
essentially, it is what it sounds like. I mean, you are creating programs, initiatives, whatever it may be, to encourage people to get to know a local culture
Mhm.
through its food experiences.
It's fantastic. And what is your aspiration once your master's is complete?
I finished my master's. I finished my
Okay.
master's 4 years ago. Yeah, and so I've been
Oh,
working in food
congratulations.
tourism ever since.
Wow, awesome. And why Spain? You know, of all countries in Europe, I know your significant other
Yeah, I
is
mean,
is Spanish.
my original plan was going to be after university to head down to South America,
Okay.
but you know, sometimes life takes a different direction.
Yeah.
So I ended up back in Spain primarily because of I met my wonderful husband Juan. And then we've stayed here. We've thought about moving around, but life has held us here in Spain
Mm.
for a while. Yeah,
Great. It's a beautiful country for anyone who hasn't been
it
there. I
is.
I only touched the surface in Barcelona, Granada, and Madrid. But yeah, let's dive into the country and your familiarity, Jane, with both Madrid, Barcelona, and I'm sure other places. Um, what is unique about Spain as a country? And then we'll get specific into the gastronomy.
I mean, that's a big question to ask, especially as someone, you know, I've spent, I don't know, a little bit over 10 years here. I'm married to a Spanish guy, so I've spent a lot of time with his family. I've actually traveled all around Spain. I've visited all of their autonomous communities, so I have a pretty good grasp on the entirety of the country. But what makes it unique compared to other countries, it's a little bit difficult because in the end, what I really love about Spain is how regional it is. So depending on where you go, if you go to a town in the south, um, it's very regional and distinct and unique from going to an area in the north, for example. So I think that the regionality of Spain makes it extremely unique.
Okay.
And then you can be cliche as well. I mean, really friendly people, strong sense of pride for being
Mm-hmm.
where they're from and for what they have to offer, and and I don't know, yeah, mix of history and architecture and food and wine and traditions. Has it all, what a lot of other countries have as well.
That's great. And coming from, outside of Spain and then moving to Spain, what is, your now favorite tradition that's unique to Spain? If you had to pick one.
Yeah, I think that I would have to say the Feria de Abril, which is in Sevilla. So my husband is from Sevilla,
Mm.
and I think that that tradition it happens once a year, and it's the most fun, uh, let's say, party holiday tradition that I've ever been a part of here in
So what,
Spain.
what happens during that or event?
Yeah, it's well, it lasts a week long,
Wow.
and basically groups of people get together and they put together what's called a caseta, which is basically like they build their own bar, an area to spend time in.
Okay.
So in there they have their own bar, they have music, they have a place to dance, and so you spend the whole day with your friends and family, just enjoying good food, drinking, local drinks and dancing. It's very traditional and very much unique to Sevilla.
That's
So
awesome.
it always feels really special to be a part of it.
Yeah. And what time of the year is it?
It's usually in April, but
Okay.
this year it's happening the first week of May.
Okay. It's right around the corner.
Yeah.
And let's now get into the traditions that center around the table, food. When in food tourism, what are people traveling to Spain finding in terms of food that's different than what they conceived before or misunderstood?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I have to admit that even before I came to Spain, I didn't really know what to expect in terms of food here. I
Mm.
mean, I think what reaches us, at least across the pond in the United States, is usually paella and sangria. And
Mm.
that's and then tapas. But do we really know what tapas are? You know, it's just kind of a word, small plates, but tapas really are something much different than that.
Hmm.
So I had no real idea of what it was. So I think that when people come here, they're pleasantly surprised just by the variety, that there's so much more to Spanish cuisine than paella.
Hmm.
And they're often surprised to learn that we don't really drink sangria here either.
So then when they leave, what are their newfound favorites, if you would?
Yeah, I mean, again, Spain is super regional, so it depends
Mm.
on where they go, right? So, let's say if they're in Barcelona, usually they come away really loving Catalan cava, for example, the local sparkling wine,
Mm.
or the patatas bravas, which are these fried potatoes with garlic sauce and spicy sauce. Or let's say they visited Sevilla and they tried some local tapas that could be, like some stewed spinach with garbanzos or salmorejo or oxtail. Let's say they visited the north and maybe they would come away for the first eating octopus for the first time and
Mm.
really learning to enjoy something that they had never tried before.
Fantastic.
So
And
lots of different yummy treats over here.
yeah, what is, before we dive into like more specifics here, Jane, what is your favorite dish? Any, it could be any meal of the day, breakfast, lunch, or dinner, but if you had to pick one Spanish dish, what would it be?
You know, I knew you were going to ask me that question, and I thought about it, and I really can't decide. It's
Hmm.
really hard for me to choose because again, Spain is so regional and it's so seasonal. You
Uh-huh.
know, I have favorite dishes for cold weather, favorite dishes for summer. But let's say I'll try to give you maybe let's say my top five.
Okay.
I think that you have to have tortilla,
Mm.
española, tortilla de patatas. It's so simple, but it's absolutely delicious anytime you have it with anything in it. I think that jamon Iberian ham as
Mm.
well is something that if I ever move away from Spain, that's something that I'm going to miss a lot.
Yeah, hard to find outside of Spain.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And then I think that probably stewed beef or pork cheeks, one of
Mm.
my favorite dishes, which
Okay.
are really good. It's kind of like a better version of American pot roast, let's
Hmm.
say, like this really delicious stewed meat. And then, boy, what else? And then I really like Spanish breakfast
Ah.
as well, which is usually just like a really good toast of good bread and then maybe some jamon and olive oil and fresh squeezed orange juice.
Mm. I know in certain parts like Granada, especially the orange trees there stood out to me.
Yeah.
Isn't there a salad with orange slices and then like black olives?
Yeah, with a little bit of white onion as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
Yeah, really good.
Very neat. Okay, so let's go ahead and kind of break down the meals of the day. So we just, kind of mentioned about breakfast being toast, jamon, olive oil, and that's another thing too, Jane. I want to touch on. A lot of people don't recognize Spain as being a great source of quality olive oil. And as you're traveling around the country, tell us how prevalent are olive groves throughout the country.
Yeah, so again, I think Spain has done a poor job of marketing itself internationally until recently, you know. I think Italians really took the hat for being the olive oil producers of the world for a long time. But it is true that Spain produces more olives than anyone in the
Wow.
world, and especially in southern Spain. So in Andalusia and a region called Jaén is basically all olive orchards. And then as well in Catalonia, here in Catalonia, they have some other olive trees that produce a tiny olive called arbequeña
Mm.
as well. So, but I would say like mainly in southern Spain and Jaén, which is southeast area inland, where they produce most of their olives.
Great. And you know it, it's accessible, it's fresh. There's nothing that compares to the taste of that good olive oil versus what you buy in a supermarket chain.
Oh, absolutely. And there's an entire world of olive oil. I mean, my appreciation for good olive oil has skyrocketed. I actually have 4 different olive oils that I always have at home. So I have one that's really refined and cheaper, which I use maybe for frying or cooking at a high heat.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have another one that's middle. And then I have an extra version that might be for salads. And then I have like a premium olive oil that I use for special occasions.
Wow. Kind of like a ladder of excellence.
Yeah.
That's great. I love it. And going back to breakfast, Jane, you had mentioned, kind of that savory side with the jamon. Are there like the sweet, jams, honey, other things like that commonly used in breakfast as well?
Not usually.
Okay.
I would say that breakfast is primarily savory here.
Mm.
I think I mean, you can go and you can get maybe a croissant or a type of pastry like that, but I wouldn't say that it's the main, yeah, I would say that it's mainly savory. You
Okay.
also have churros
Mm.
that you can have for breakfast as well, which are obviously sweet, especially if you dunk it into chocolate. But I would say primarily we have a savory breakfast here.
Okay. And churros, my understanding was that was more of a dessert thing, but it can be, is it both dessert or breakfast?
Breakfast. Usually it's breakfast,
Okay.
after school snack, or late night coming back from partying
Ah.
the next morning.
So all day churros are
You can always
accessible.
find, yeah.
All right, so let's continue on in the day with lunch. Kind of talk about, your experience in South America, Mexico, and Spain. Is there that pause in the middle of the day for this type of meal? And then what makes up the meal?
Yeah, so lunch is our biggest meal of the day. We usually have a first plate, second plate, dessert included in the meal. In Spain, it's really common, for example, to have a menú del día in the restaurants. Every restaurant serves a daily menu, which is a fixed price, and you have your choice of first plates, second plates, and then what's included is coffee, wine, and dessert. And this is for lunch. So imagine people in the middle of their workday, they're going out and have this big meal, and then they go back to work afterwards.
They must be extra productive.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And
so
what
it's
are,
my
go ahead.
I was just going to say it's my favorite meal of the day here.
Understood. What is the difference between the different dishes that make up a first plate versus the second plate?
I would say that the first plates are usually soups or salads, even pasta, soup, salad, pasta dishes. And then usually the second course is more of like a meat or fish sort of dish.
Okay. And I'm sure as you travel throughout the country that meat is changing or more popular in certain areas, and then as you get coastal, you're going to see the seafood.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. And what would you say? Everyone knows Spanish gazpacho, right? What are some other soups that are available?
I would say that let's see here. There's one in Galicia, which is in the northwest of Spain, which is they have a great soup that's called caldo gallego, which is basically translates to Galician broth.
Hmm.
And it's a great soup with this deep broth that has ham and spinach and onions. It's like the perfect thing to have on a cold day.
Wow.
And then another popular soup that they have is part of a bigger dish. So in central Spain, they have a dish called cocido, which is served in three different courses. So they put everything into a big pot, they cook it all together, but then they serve it in different courses. So the first part to that dish is the soup, the sopa de cocido, which is basically the broth of everything that they cook together. And then they cook it with some little noodles. So you eat that, which is probably my favorite soup because
Okay.
it has so much flavor. And then after that, you eat the vegetables that were cooked, and then at the end, you eat the meat that was cooked together.
Wow. Definitely a process, and the results sound amazing.
Yeah, I would say probably more than soups. I would say that stews are much more common here in Spain.
Okay. Kind of like the ox cheek or one that you had mentioned earlier.
Yeah, like slowly cooked garbanzos with
Mm.
cod or slowly cooked beans with meat. Like a lot more of this sort of stewed meat and beans or stewed meat and vegetables or stewed fish and vegetables rather than, I would say, soup as we have in our minds in
Okay.
North America. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for explaining that.
hmm
And coffee you mentioned. Coffee is a staple part of lunch, correct?
Yeah, yeah, I would say I was also surprised by how much coffee we usually drink here. So normally when you wake up in the morning, you have a coffee and then you have another coffee, you have a second breakfast, usually around 10 o'clock in the morning where you have coffee, and then you usually always have coffee after lunch as
Wow.
well. So they drink a lot of coffee, but the coffees are much smaller than in the
Mm.
United States, for example. So you're having, this much milk rather than an entire glass of milk with your coffee.
And as we move on into the day, going back for those who are just joining us, we mentioned churros could be an after-school snack. So, come dinner time, Jane, people are coming home from work. Lunch was the biggest meal of the day. What does dinner look like?
So lunch is the biggest meal. We usually finish around 3, and then you have merienda, which is basically like our
Mm.
afternoon snack. And that's usually something small, usually like some fruit or a small sandwich, maybe some cookies, something tiny to tide you over. And then we don't have dinner until maybe 9, 10 o'clock at night.
Okay.
And dinner also is much smaller. So don't worry, we don't do the whole 3-course, 2-course meal at dinner. Dinner is something smaller, usually maybe some eggs, a salad, a sandwich, some fish. We usually have something much lighter for dinner.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And what is kind of the family atmosphere? Your husband Juan, understanding how his family grew up. Is it kind of making sure that the family's all together for that meal at the end of the day?
Yeah, yeah, I would say, I mean, I think it has changed. His mom was a housewife, and so I
Okay.
think traditionally, when you have someone who's at home who has the time to cook and prepare meals for everyone, it's definitely expected that everyone will be there to sit around the table and enjoy them together. I think maybe it's changing a little bit now with 2 working
Mm.
parents and you just don't have as much time. But I
Mhm.
think that sitting around the table to have meals together is very much an important part of Spanish culture.
Great. And bedtime usually, what time of day is that? If dinner is around 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah, probably usually around midnight.
Okay.
hmm
Wow, long days.
Yeah. And then up at 6 o'clock for work.
Wow.
Yeah.
And let's go into holidays. What, because we could talk forever about this, but what holiday stands out in terms of the culinary traditions?
I
If you
mean,
had to pick.
as you can imagine, Spain is a very Catholic country, and so most of their holidays are religious holidays.
Mm.
And depending on that, that sort of indicates the type of food that they have. So a lot of the holidays, for example, in Semana Santa, Holy Week,
Uh-huh.
is a religious holiday, a Catholic religious holiday. So, for example, some of the food that's typical is cod, right? So you're eating
Mm.
fish during that week, or usually always some type of pastry or cookie that goes along with the holiday. So in Holy Week, we make torrijas, which are kind of like French toast's cousin, let's
Ah,
say.
neat.
Yeah, they're actually very, very similar, but here we spend time to heat up the milk and infuse it with some flavor. So we heat up the milk and infuse it with cinnamon and orange peel, and then
Wow.
you soak the bread, fry it, and then you can put cinnamon and sugar on the outside of them or a little bit of honey, and then usually we eat them cold. So not
Okay.
hot like French toast, but it's so similar, really, in the end.
Yeah, it sounds amazing the way that the milk is, prepared in advance. It makes me want to try that.
Yeah. Step up your French toast game.
Exactly, Spanish toast.
Yeah.
Great. And Jane, I want to ask, we started off talking about the most kind of preconceived notion of Spain being paella, the dish paella. How often, do you make that at home? And what goes into the process? Because it's, when you see sometimes it's in this huge, huge pan and just such an art.
Yeah, so paella is traditionally from Valencia, which is a
Okay.
town on the east coast of Spain. So mainly, I mean, if you really want to visit Spain, and you want to have a true, authentic, good paella, you should go to the region of Valencia. But
Mm.
that's not to say that it's part of Spanish culture and that we do make it and eat it in other places. Typically, paella is eaten on Sunday for
Okay.
lunch. So it's like a family Sunday lunch meal.
Neat.
Um, the traditional paella is actually made with rabbit rather than seafood.
Wow, I never knew that.
Yeah, so the traditional one has rabbit, sometimes it has snails. It
Huh.
has a large bean, a large white bean, and green beans as well. So it's actually
Okay.
quite different from what you have in your mind of paella. I think the
Yeah.
most popular one is probably the seafood paella that we know. Um, but I think that the most important part of paella is the broth that you use to cook the rice in. That's really where it takes the most of its flavor.
Hmm. And is that typically a vegetable broth, a chicken broth?
Depends on what type you're making. Of course, if it's a seafood broth, you would make like a fumet, which is a
Mm.
seafood fish broth. Or if you're making a meat one that could have like pork or chicken, you could probably use chicken broth for that.
Mm. Very neat.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what kind of, I guess, across the pond, as we mentioned earlier, made rabbit kind of come out of this notion of what paella is. Interesting.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting that, when I first got here, I was really um, kind of shocked to see rabbit on the menu because in the United States, rabbits are usually our pets,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And so it was really different for me to see it on the menu here.
Hmm.
It's really a common ingredient that they use all across the country here.
Wow. And my last question, Jane, on that same note, are there any other, produce items or ingredients that you're going to find in Spain, whether it's regional or throughout the country, that you were surprised, to discover or you wouldn't see in other countries?
Well, I think I had no idea that Spain made the best paprika.
Oh,
They have one area in Extremadura, which is southwest of Madrid, that's called um, what is it called? Well, it's in the area of Extremadura, and they're
Okay.
famous for their paprika.
Wow.
Absolutely famous for their paprika, and they make amazing spicy and sweet paprika. So I was shocked. I was kind of surprised by that. Like I will always have Spanish paprika in my cupboard now for cooking.
Mm,
I think that other products, I mean, yeah, it's so regional. I think the different types of legumes in
okay.
Spain always surprises me. There's a huge and vast variety, even in types of lentils.
Wow.
Now you can go to the store and you can pick different types of lentils, different types of white beans or dark beans or bigger beans. I think that that's something that I didn't expect in Spain. But the more time I spend here, the more appreciation I have for, this tiny difference. Okay, let's go to this certain area and have this dish, and they have these special tiny garbanzo beans,
Mm,
right? And you wouldn't think that maybe that's something unique or different or special, but then you try them, and as you start tasting them around the country, you kind of feel this appreciation for these differences and these really, really um, unique ingredients for each area that you go to.
hmm. Really neat. And that all circles back to, you're the expert in it as a food tourist professional, but that whole industry is about discovering what different countries and cultures really offer in terms of the food.
Exactly. Exactly.
Fantastic. Jane, thank you so much. This has been a really, really enlightening conversation, delicious, and I've learned a lot. So I hope anyone watching in the future, as I'll post this after the fact, has learned something new about Spanish food and recipes. And Jane, I want to give this time to you to let everyone know where they can find you, follow you, and stay connected and continue to learn about what you do.
Awesome. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for having me on. I mean,
You're
it's a
welcome.
fun topic for me to talk about. I enjoy Spanish food every day, so it's my pleasure to get to share some of my insights and learnings over these last 10 years here. And yeah, if you want to follow me on Instagram at Jane Food Travel, I think that's the best place to find me. Reach out if you have any questions about Spain, traveling, eating, anything like that. I'd be happy to talk more about it.
Awesome. Thank you again so much for your time, Jane. It was a pleasure, and I hope everyone has enjoyed this conversation. We'll stay in touch, Jane. Thank you again.
Perfect. Thank you. Bye.
Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks. You too. Bye.